So what I'm going to share with you now is kind of an old man's history, if you like. So when I was young, I was brought up on a farm, and being brought up on a farm meant that I was able to learn things from siblings, from people who they learned from experience. So I learned things from experience. So I went hunting, I went fishing, I learned to ride a horse, I drove vehicles, I did all sorts of things that I probably wasn't supposed to do, but I did them because that was the environment that I was being brought up in. When I left school, I went farming, and so I continued to do those things. I farmed in the King Country, so I became more involved, and I started climbing mountains, camping out, doing all sorts of those things. So sort of survival things. Still a lot of hunting, still a lot of horse riding, a lot of outdoor stuff. I then, a few years later, I then ended up in Canada. And in Canada, I guided hunting trips. I also guided rafting trips and fishing. And I even spent the time, although it's totally irrelevant, I spent 3 months on my own in a log cabin in the middle of winter, surrounded by about 2 meters of snow. The temperature never got above -4 in 3 months, and I never saw another person at all for 3 months. I had no communication with the outside world whatsoever. There were no cell phones, there was no radio. I used to listen to a transistor radio in the evenings, and I was in the middle of the Canadian Rockies, and I could pick up in the evenings, I could pick up maybe a game of basketball or something from California, and just for the sake of hearing other people's voices, I would listen. I had no idea who was playing, I had no idea of the result at the end of the game. It was just that, yeah, at least I could hear another human voice. That's kind of a little bit irrelevant. When I came back to New Zealand, I was involved with skedaddle ski tours and river rats rafting. So I ran the operation from Turangi, and I was surrounded by a lot of people who had outdoor experience. We kayaked, we whitewater rafted, we rock climbed, and we did some other outdoor pursuit type things. I met up with Graham Dingle, and Graham Dingle was a founder of OPC. And Graham's original concept was that he wanted to share all the things that people like myself and himself, and I'm not even putting myself in the same league as Graham Dingle, because Graham Dingle was a legend. He climbed mountains. He was a legend of traverses. So he traversed the Arctic Circle. Spent 3 months going from one side to the other. So, but he was a legend. But what he wanted to do when he set up OPC was he wanted to share with as many people the opportunity to do things in the outdoors. Opportunities that we had, but there were a lot of people that didn't have those same opportunities, so he wanted them to share the outdoors. So to that end, he started OPC, and he started training some people, or getting some people together, upskilling them so that they could take school groups, and more people could experience the outdoors. And that was a great thing, and OPC worked really well for a long time. But one of the things that I believe with the outdoors and the attraction for me is that there is some risk involved. So when I was in Canada and I was on my own, I was 42 kilometres away from the nearest person. I had no communication with the nearest person, and for me to reach the nearest person, I would have had to either have snowshoed or cross-country ski. The people out there, when they did eventually come and pick me up 3 months after dropping me off, they came in by snowmobile and picked me up. But had I broken my leg or had an accident of any kind, the chances of survival for me were probably quite remote. Yeah. I remember when I first arrived there, I took some supplies in with me, and the first night inside the cabin, the eggs froze inside the shells. It was that cold. So yeah, if I hadn't have had enough food, I would have starved. If I hadn't have kept the fire going, I would have frozen. If I hadn't have sourced water, I wouldn't have been in too good shape. So there was an element of risk there, and I don't think that you should necessarily ever take the element of risk away entirely. Yeah? But you should always know what the risks are. So you should always do that risk analysis so that you know where you are. A lot of the times you can only do that by experience. So if we're talking, have you specifically learned about the tragedy in the canyon at OPC?
Yeah.
You have? Yeah. So there were a number of things there that there were, if you had the experience, there were signs that you would have done things differently. Interesting for me, and I think I shared this with Miss Colburn while we were at Field Centre last year, which is why she's asked me to speak to you today, is I think OPC over a number of years have actually lost their way a little bit in that they initially we learned on our own. So I learned to raft just with mates. I learned to kayak just with mates. We jumped in a kayak and we went down the river. We fell out a lot. We scrambled to the bank. I can remember a mate of mine falling out of his kayak and his kayak going down and being wrapped around a log in the middle of the river. It was bent around this log. And 2 days later, we rafted down to the same log, went back to the log. I stood on the front with a chainsaw, chainsawed this log, hugely dangerous. Should never have done it. Chainsawed this log. The log flew up in the air, as did the kayak, and we retrieved the kayak. It was an adventure. Did we identify all the risks? Well, we identified half of them, and then we got lucky. But we learned those things just doing them. Then OPC came along, and over a number of years, they've decided that they are the only ones that can teach you. So they learn from doing it with other people, but now they say, well, the only way you can learn to kayak is that you need to go to OPC and you do one of their courses. Or the only way you can learn to raft is you go to OPC and you learn how to raft. We all learned how to raft by, we had to do 20 trips on the raft with somebody else, and then after we'd done, in fact we used to do 10 on the raft, and then we used to guide the raft for 10 other trips with somebody on board who was a rafting guide, and then we were a rafting guide. And with that, we could go overseas. We could go to Canada and be a rafting guide. We could go to Australia and be a rafting guide because we had the experience. Yeah. But now OPC says no, you actually have to get a certificate. So you have to sign up, you pay money, and they're the only ones that can teach you. And I think I think that's a little bit sad, because then I think that it becomes exclusive. Yeah. So how many of you guys and girls have been involved just doing outdoor stuff on your own? Anybody? Anybody go hunting? Anybody go fishing? Yep. When you go fishing, initially you would have gone fishing with your parents or somebody that's older, and they teach you learn how to fish, yeah? And they probably learned from somebody else. So if somebody come along and said suddenly, well, actually, the risks involved with fishing are too great, so you actually have to go and do a course on learning how to fish. You know, there's safety issues with the boat, launching the boat, then going out of the water, using life jackets. Maybe you have to become a mechanic in case your boat engine stops out there and you need to be able to fix it. You know, so we get too much regulation, if you like.
So do you disagree with them being, the OPC being the only people that can
I disagree with the exclusiveness of OPC. So them deciding, and don't get me wrong, because nowadays the OPC instructors are extremely well qualified, much more than in our day. So they actually have done courses, and they're upskilling all the time, and they're doing much more risk analysis and debriefs and all the likes of that. Almost all of you would have gone on Field Centre, or most of you were here in year 10 and went on Field Centre, yeah? And the rafting guy, the guy that owns the rafting company that we use for Field Centre, he was 18 years old when I was running River Rats, and he arrived at River Rats as an 18-year-old, and we taught him how to raft, and he now owns that rafting company. And Garth would think that he was the only one that could teach anybody to raft, and the only one that anybody should go with would be his rafting company, because they're the safest and all the rest of it. And he was an absolute complete nutter at 18, and a real cowboy when he first started rafting. It just happens that he's now 40-something years of age and thinks that he's mature and he owns the company, and so he thinks that he's more responsible. So in light of what I've just said and what we've learned, and to get your excellence, are there any questions that you would like to ask me, and then I can maybe give you my view on it, and that might help you come up with some arguments for or against, or help you with your excellence questions. Angus, you've definitely got a question. You can't think of one. So excellence coming up.
Sydney, how do you fix today?
Of what? What? Of the...
Do you know the characters in the Mangatapopo tragedy?
Yeah, I know a little bit about it. I mean, I've taken people down that canyon, yeah.
So how restrictive is the environment in terms of getting into the gorge and seeing the water? And
I think that the whole crux of that tragedy was the fact that in that environment it changes so quickly. The catchment area is very steep, so when it rains, the runoff is very, very quick, and the rivers go up very, very quickly. So you have to recognise that. So it became, so technically, I think the guys were well skilled in what they did. They knew canyoning, they had water skills, they had rope skills, but what they didn't have was experience or maybe they were a bit gung-ho in thinking that they could beat the elements, and they could beat what was going to happen. So they didn't fully understand how quickly it could happen. Yeah.
So the guide, whose name was Jodie Sullivan, had only been in the gorge 5 times, is that right?
Yeah.
And we think she may have led one solo without an instructor prior to that.
Yep.
Do you think 5 times in a gorge like that, visualising it is enough?
No,
Is it,
no. But I think that the mistake was made before they actually went into the gorge, because they had weather report before they left the hut.
Sam?
What's that? No, but they had it. Yeah.
So you, just to clarify, you're saying that the mistake happened even before they left.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't put the blame on the instructor.
No, not necessarily. I think the blame on the instructor comes from, well, yeah, I mean, blame. I wouldn't put the blame on the instructor at all. I would probably put the blame on the instructor's supervisors. For not realising that he didn't have the skill, he didn't have the experience to take that trip in there. And then not taking responsibility for the fact that they had the weather report, and they didn't pass it on to him. So he went in pretty blind.
Yeah. Caitlin, question?
Do you think there could be ever another like OPC but not OPC? Like,
I think, yeah, I mean, personally, and this is really old school and not, I think there's always room for an accident. I think it will happen. I think it will happen again. Much and all as we try so hard these days to eliminate all accidents. You know, we talk about 0 road toll, but things will happen again. There have been plenty of things put in place at OPC to suggest that it won't happen in that gorge again, it won't happen to an OPC instructor again, but something else will happen.
yeah.
You know, our students were on the mountain the day before the eruption, which trapped a guy in the Croker hut. You know that story? Yeah. So it erupted and threw the rock through the door of the crater hut and pinned his leg and he nearly died, but did lose his leg. Now, our kids were up the mountain the day before. If they had snow caved and stayed up there. If they'd have stayed up there that night. So yeah, there are all, you can plan as much as you can plan, but sometimes there's something that will happen that you can't plan for. So then it comes down to experience and how you deal with that. So you're saying, was it his fault? I think that the mistake was made before they went. Could he have done some things differently? Yes, he could have. Even in the canyon, but yeah, that's not to say that it was his fault.
At the halfway point, when calm conditions and stuff in the gorge, however high the halfway point is, do you think that they could have abseiled out?
Yep. Yeah, I think that they could have.
Do you think that's an essential skill that an instructor should have had before taking a group into the gorge?
Yep.
Because that was one of the ones that Jodie, who's a female by the way, she didn't have that qualification.
Yeah.
She had 4 of the 6 competencies, she didn't have that one. And does anyone know what the other competency was? I can't remember. Yeah. Mr. Piaget mentioned about the fact that we're always aiming for a 0 road toll. This could be one of those tangents that you go off on, and you talk about how we try and put in so many things to protect ourselves, but actually accidents happen. Okay, and sometimes those accidents are preventable, like idiots drink driving. But sometimes an inexperienced driver might hit black ice and an accident will happen. And heaven hope it's not one of you lot, but accidents do happen. So if we can plan for things, we're trying to limit them, but not put you in cotton wool. Boys, you guys been quiet over there. Anything specific you want to ask?
Since they brought in the health and safety regulations in New Zealand, and now they're about to make those even more stringent, since they brought those in, they actually haven't decreased the number of accidents in New Zealand. What they have done is they've been able to apportion blame. So in almost all the cases, yeah, accidents on building sites haven't decreased, accidents in the forest haven't decreased. Some areas they've actually increased, but now they can actually lay the blame on somebody, which I don't think is particularly helpful. I think the thing that a lot of those regulations, this will be really controversial, I think a lot of those regulations take responsibility away from the people involved. How many drownings were there this summer? Do you answer that?
19 by November.
Yeah. So those drownings, and I think a lot of that is because people don't take responsibility enough for themselves anymore. So you know your limits. When you're not allowed to climb trees, then you don't know how high you can climb. You know? When we were young, we climbed trees. You never ever climbed above where you felt comfortable. Now you're not allowed to climb trees. You're not sure where comfortable is. So when you're swimming, a lot of the people that drown, where they were swimming was beyond their capabilities. They were either swimming on the west coast and surf that they weren't capable of swimming, or they went to rivers where A, they didn't actually recognise that there was danger, and B, they weren't qualified to swim anymore. People that go and try and rescue other people when they're drowning, and they can't swim themselves.
Do you think we're too cautious in some things?
Do I think?
They're too cautious in some things?
I think we're too protective of people, so that people don't know their own limits, yeah? So they haven't actually developed that skill.
See?
Do you think the tragedies that happen actually have like a negative effect on the OPC, or should those things like
Yeah, I think it did. It had a big negative
obviously
effect.
consequences and then you like makes the OPC actually more prone to
No. I think, in fact, probably opposite. You would have been at your safest going to OPC after the tragedy, because they just made sure that they would have sent 10 people on that. They would have got 10 weather reports afterwards, analysed them all and not sent them. And if they had sent them, they would have sent 5 people who would have doubled up on all the skills that they had. Yeah, just that they went over the top.
So now places like Garth down at the rafting
Yeah.
and over at Tree Jumpers, etc., they have to go through safety audits, which I believe every 4 years.
Yeah.
Who's to say that the auditor coming in is more experienced or knowledgeable than the actual people running the event?
Well, that's, and like, for instance, Graham Dingle's never ever done a course, right? And most people my age never did courses. I mean, you learn things by going with, doing with them with people who had learned and had experience, and they taught you. And then if you became capable enough, you taught somebody else. Now some bad habits got passed on, and some bad things got passed on if you were learning from the wrong person. Good things happen as well. So is the person that audits the forestry, I mean, I had a very, very good mate in Taupo who went around, his job is to go around and teach safety in forestry, right? He's now dead because of a forestry accident.
It's a bit ironic.
I know.
Do you get my point though? We send these independent auditors to different things and say go audit kayaking or go audit tree jumpers, and they might not have any personal experience themselves, apart from maybe a personal interest. The kayaking people fall under the maritime instructors, so I think that's water safety, like Navy, etc. And they're meant to be in charge of kayaking. Probably not many of them actually get into a kayak. Just because you can drive a boat, possibly a big one, or sail a ship, doesn't necessarily mean you've got the skills and experience to know what is happening when you're rafting or kayaking. But they send that person to go and audit that industry. So we need to make challenge some assumptions there as well. Has anyone else got any questions for Mr. Piaget before we thank him? No? All right.
So how do they, what's the assessment?
They are analysing the risks that occurred during the Mangatapopo tragedy.
Yep.
Not apportioning blame, but deciding which causal factor was the most prevalent.
Yep.
And then for the excellence, they've got to see what the wider implications of education outside the classroom are. And so they can go on any tangent they like.
Yep.
So they can look
I'd
at...
like to read some.
Sure. Right, what do you lot say?
No problem.
Thank you, Martin.
Hope it was some help.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah.